So, good evening, Ms. Witkowski-Smith. Are we ready to call the meeting to order?
Please call the meeting to order. Thank you.
Excellent. So good evening, everyone. We welcome you to the February 21st Educational Affairs meeting. I'd like to take a quick roll call of the committee meeting, the committee members in attendance. So, Ms. Witkowski-Smith.
Present.
So, Ms. Nanette Wissett.
Here.
Ms. Christine Delay.
Here.
Ms. Michelle Williams.
Here.
Mr. Kevin Henry.
Here.
Thank you. And I'd also like to recognize our two additional board members present, Ms. Kelly Hoffman and Ms. Rachel Holbert are also present in attendance today. So may I, before we proceed with tonight's business, may I please have a motion to approve the January minutes? So they were sent electronically. In the spirit of due diligence, there's also a copy on the table because sometimes you're never sure if people are reading all your words. And
So moved. Second.
And so, by a vote of oral consent, are the minutes from the last meeting accepted?
Yes. Yes.
And we are ready to move on to tonight's business. And so, during tonight's meeting, we will have two topics on the agenda. Mr. Andy Benzing will be talking about the math vertical team and providing an update on the ongoing work of that team. And I am Dr. Leslie Pratt. I will be presenting some information on professional learning communities and thinking about that, the scope of that work in the immediate as well as in the long term. And so I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mr. Benzing. After I review, these are our mission and vision statements. They guide everything we do. This is the role of the committee. Today, we're focusing on educational and curricular items in this meeting. And these are the meeting protocols that have been in place in this meeting as well as in all of our meetings. And so without further ado, Mr. Andy Benzing is going to present an update on the math vertical team.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Pratt. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us in what's to be an overview of some of the work we've been doing as a larger committee vertical team with the mathematics side. Relative for the past year, I'd say we're coming up this March will be a full year since we launched the vertical team. And we're here tonight to kind of talk about how that work shows up both in planning, both in practice, both in some research we've been taking a look at. And largely a lot of our efforts for what we've done. So what is a math vertical team? What's the main focus of it? In some places, this is referred to as a math circle. Other places, a kind of a PLC type of a model, an opportunity to pull in stakeholders across a K-12 framework, special ed representation, administrative representation, specialist representation. Teachers obviously are a large portion of this. But the idea is to try to, and one of the drawbacks I think of just a public education in general, when you have distinct buildings and distinct locations, sometimes in different towns, is that you can get these siloed approaches to the philosophies to things. So this is a direct effort to try to combat that, come up with a common vision for what we hold really true and important in terms of mathematics. And over the course of a K-12 experience, what we hope our students, what are the core ideas that they're going to come away with. So that's the intent and purpose of the math vertical team. You know, just a little bit of history. Back in February of 2023, a year ago, we put an all call out for that to say who's interested in serving on something like this. We'll meet during in-service days, we'll meet after school, we'll meet at conferences that we can attend. The kickoff officially happened in March. I'd say 38, around 40, the number goes up, the number goes down. We're hovering around 38 different educators that said we'd like to participate in this, which is great. The representation, I would say is almost dead on to what you would expect in terms of proportionality of NP, SRS, WES, and middle school and high school, which is terrific. For the first time, I think some of the secondary people realized, because there's not a lot of secondary, like there's only 8 middle school teachers, so when all the elementary math teachers are like, oh boy, all of a sudden, I said, yeah, get that. There's a lot more of them than you want. Regularly, I'd say we probably have about 20 that come to the meetings, but we pull from a different group of 38 every time, which is kind of interesting. I try to vary the meeting times because everyone has different commitments. So you'll see periodically come up board updates and the board motions and math vertical team for different hours. And even this month, there's just 3 names in the math vertical. Those 3 people that decided to join later on and I wanted to keep them involved in the process. So that's kind of the role of the math vertical team past year. It's been a lot of fun, I will say. We do math together as a group, generally, for about an hour and a half. We just do math together. They talk about how and why and what works best and take a look at research. What, that's not it. I wasn't joking. That's not a joke.
No, I was,
That's part of it.
sorry, I said it sounds like a lot of fun.
You're absolutely correct. We'll have speakers. So I got some pictures here. So here's a picture of one of our vertical teams in the middle school library. And this picture on the right is one of my favorites because you've got Dawn Dankinich in there who teaches kindergarten. We've got Kirsty Tanzash in there who teaches linear algebra. You've got Sugar close to us, who's a 2nd grade teacher. You got Emily Sparks, who's our math specialist elementary. You got Chad Mitchell in there, who's our middle school math department chair, and Dr. Tuck's in there too. So we've got a little bit of everything. That's the real intent of what the math vertical thing was supposed to be. Student services in there somewhere. I gotta put my glasses on, but they're in there for sure. Kind of a kindergarten teacher, yeah, so very excited. So what are they looking at, right? What in the world possibly could they be looking? Well, this is the case with these presentations, you know, this is a classroom experience here, interactive, get ready, here we go. This is what they're looking at. The growing worm scenario. Okay, so on day 1, on day 2, then on day 3. So we had a speaker come in, Annie Fetter, who's a national speaker. And have you ever heard this phrase? It's often published in the New York Times. You see it in other places. What do you notice? What do you wonder? That's pulling right out of Annie Fetter's work back when she was with the Math Forum through Swarthmore College, which she's an alumni from. Moved to Drexel University when the Math Forum went away. And then ultimately NCPM, again, right over there in Rutledge, they had an office. That kind of dissolved and everything was pulled into the DC and she kind of broke off at that point. But there's a lot of local history behind this train of thought. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Again, New York Times have this all the time. So I'm curious. I'm just gonna give you 10 seconds, 20 seconds of think time here. And what do you notice about these 3 days worth of worm growth? Paul, even though you're off camera, you're gonna have to participate, so you're not prepared. So, we'll just as if it's class, kind of, what are some of the things you notice here?
Looks like it's doubling almost every day.
Yeah,
Gonna double.
yeah,
The triangles are increasing by 1 every day.
nice, very good. So you see triangles. That's the name, that's the maybe 1 or 2 more? Paul?
It's all triangles.
Yeah, Paul sees are triangles. Does anyone see squares?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, so that's kind of interesting, right? And this is a technique that Annie had shared with us, this idea of putting something up, but not as much prompting as we typically give math students. And you'll find, giving them time, there lies the challenge, that they'll come up with much more than ever you possibly could have in terms of instruction. But this is a list from a group of 4th graders that did this, and let me look at it closely. This might be our list. But you'll look at all the noticings and wonderings that happen here. And the beautiful thing about this debrief is the wonderings, all of a sudden, again, these are student-centered, kind of drive your lesson. And if you look closely at some of them, if I can make 1 million a day, 5 a day, 100 a day, infinity a day, if the worm can keep growing, how long would it take? How many would there be? What would the next worm look like? All of a sudden, you got way more questions than you, the one teacher, could ask of your class. You've got a whole list there. Heck, if you debrief 3 or 4 of them and then give 3 or 4 more for homework, then go explore. A lot of our work here, you'll see is reflected in the strategic plan, in particular pathway 2, which is the best pathway on teaching, learning, innovation. The most important of them. I know, Mr. Henry. No, the one where we have a large focus on in the TLI office for sure. And the idea of putting the student at the center of the learning. That's specifically what this technique is designed to do. Those are the student ideas and prompts. This is a little different look. This is a different presentation you'll see up in the front of the room. Is my laser going to work? Yeah. Right here are 2 elementary teachers, one from SRS, one from Wes, Ms. Conahan and Ms. Shapiro. who actually are modeling a data statistics collection. You'll see some of these counting, cup stacking. They were a partner pair team during the old OA, for anyone that remembers that, the online academy during the COVID time. This was one of the lessons that they sent home. They gave the kids cups. They had to stack at home and they all entered their data together. This is the real beauty for me. They have done this for 2-3 years in their classroom. And now look what just happened in this one meeting. Everyone in that room sees now this and experiences this can benefit and realize the beauty in data statistics and collecting. This teacher down here is Caroline Esposito, a high school teacher, teaches our stat courses. She's like, this is spectacular, these kids, and interjected, maybe we could add this layer to it to plant this seed. So when they get to the high school, they see that. The middle school teacher said, we don't do nearly enough of this type of engagement. So next thing you know, I'm sitting back and I'm just grinning. This is fabulous stuff. So the purpose of this slide is to say, not only do we have outside speakers, but we're also benefiting from our own best practices and sharing that. That's really good. We'll also do some readings and discussions. This was an article, Steve Langwald, who's outside of DC, but he came up to Westchester University last winter and gave a talk that I attended. And then his article was in the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. So we unpacked that. We had him kind of take a look at the visit with us. And again, this is focus on equity to build a math talk classroom, right? To say to the students, what in the intent, there's a QR code if anyone at home is interested in reading that, or that you all have a copy of that, that's a link you could actually click on and take you there to the PDF of that article. But the idea is, yeah, there it is there. The idea here is if the prompts that we provide for our classes engage in student discussion and collaboration, now all of a sudden there's that much more access to what you're asking them in terms of mathematics and equity, then we're providing access and equity for most. That's interesting too. So what prompted all of this? What was the outtake of all this? Paul, would you mind just going back to the slide deck for me? Thank you for sharing that though. That's where the article is. Was this, right? So I want you to just take a second or two just to take a look at that problem and ask yourself, how does this particular slide, this prompt to a class strike you? This is the title of Teresa's Tiles. This is pulled right out of a textbook, not one that we have, but one that certainly has been used. That was like, you know, yeah, well, you know, we can't do. The kids pick up on that. So we got it. Guys done reading, you get the hang, you got the idea, yeah. How does it strike you?
Wordy.
Yeah.
I'm divided. Get a professional.
We're not processing it.
I'll have her in there.
I did this in some grade.
Try to put yourself in the shoes of someone that has a difficulty with reading, with processing, with comprehension.
Yeah.
How then is a prompt like this gonna limit, I shouldn't give it away, impact their access to the mathematics? Significant. Is it really critical that we have them process through all this, that we give them the question? Can we repurpose this to something like this? Same diagram. Make a list of what you notice, make a list of what you wonder. The next thing you know, access is opened up. Everyone's engaging in the activity. They have a motivation to answer some of these questions. There's one question on this slide. Right?
Yeah.
2 questions, I should say. And I would argue, no, leave it at that. You're gonna get a lot more, I wonder, questions out of this. So this is the type of thing we start talking about. And these conversations are not always easy, I should say. I'm definitely not gonna record them and put them on in front of the whole public. But there was a lot of argument about it's really important for kids to be able to process through and reason and comprehend and dig through and find a problem. We're not gonna disagree with that. Should that be all the time? Should that be our intro to this course? Should that be the start of where we are? Or maybe it's something that happens down the end, or maybe it happens when they're ready. And if they're not ready on that day one, maybe we wait a little bit. So these are our conversations that really cause teachers in the room to really question and think and do it in a safe way. So you put these things on, and I think we've probably met 24 times since we started this. And you say, you know, is there any value in this? Is this sinking in? Is this happening through? I got this email 2 days later. This is April 11th last year after we ran through this series. Thought you'd like enjoy this, did this technique today after my kids were struggling with this concept yesterday. Such improvement today. Was a 4th grade teacher at one of our elementary schools, similar problem. Stripped it away. You see the blue highlights over what the questions were. What do you notice? What do you wonder? That's our exact shots from their class, what the students asked. So it's neat to see this expand. So this is one role of the math vertical team. I'll be honest and say that, you know, part of the intent of this was to come to a consensus, I believe, a core idea of what we hold really valuable and important. So we can leverage it, start looking at resources. But we enjoyed this process so long, they said, we gotta keep doing this. Like even after any of this stopped, we're gonna continue. We're gonna look at CE time at the elementary school. How can we repurpose that? The middle school and the high school are thrilled to be in the same room with each other. Some days it's a really big bridge to get them together. So part of the process of recognizing what we do well and what we need to improve on involves surveys for them to go back and ask their colleagues and what it was that you think we do really well. We surveyed not just the 30-ish people in the room, but all the math educators in the district, but there's quite a few when you involve them all K-12. And this is a list of a lot of the strengths. I list them here, I'm not gonna read through each of these, but some of the themes, we started to see themes, right? Our commitment to ensuring that students understand math rather than just able to regurgitate algorithms. That seemed to happen in different language throughout the grade level. Pictorial, abstract, problem solving came up time and time again. So we're starting to formulate this idea of what we hold is really valuable. This is areas that we hope to improve on, right? The group is their own worst critic, right? There's a lot of audits, but this group is gonna double the audits in terms of the things we need to work on. They know, they're in it every day. And you'll see themes here that support a lot of the initiatives that we're trying to address in the strategic plan as well, in terms of inequities in our performance, access, differentiation, you'll see over and over and over again, in a lot of these comments. Now, this kept coming up, language component, very difficult. What can we do to find ways to give access? Truly differentiating instruction. This is more or less the distillation of it. This is kind of the summary page. After we all set through, we coded all the data. We looked at all, this room was filled with these big pieces of paper all around. They're still in my office. I like to break them out every now and then when we start getting over things like, wow, the online resources are da 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 da. I literally unrolled the papers, I stuck them up and I said, that was a nice to have, but it's not core, right? It's not a core what we're looking for. What we all talked about was access for all, differentiation. So good. Some of these things you've heard us say through the past year, low floor, high ceiling, and equity lens of belonging. This was really neat to hear from them. Everyone is a mathematician. We want to be deliberate about this and our instruction moving forward. That kids can have a mathematical identity and improve on that over time when we start talking about math autobiographies and what they could look like. Again, I think it was wonderful to hear these ideas come through. So, you know, sooner or later, step one for this, because part of this is to feed into what resources will we like. A lot of the resources that we have in the district are over 10 years old. None of them are younger than 10 years old. Some are up to 13 years old in terms of what we've had. And things have changed. We've had our eyes opened a bit to trying to address gaps in what we're seeing, trying to provide as much access as possible. So we said, we're going to look at new resources as we have been for the last year. Let's be thoughtful and mindful of how we're going to do this. And before we brought any vendors in, we said to ourselves, it's really important that we know who we are and what we want and what we hold true. Because the vendors come in, they did, and with really fancy presentations and free sandwiches and all this. I couldn't believe how much. I was like, there's no recession for these people. And wow the people, and they take your focus off of what's important. So we thought that was really important to have that in our math sessions first. So we brought on the vendors. I'd say before we brought them on, there was a little layer that I just did internally in my own office with 2 or 3 people where we ran all of these people through Ed Reports, which is a third-party independent platform that measures the alignment to standards, the readability of each of these products, the access level in terms of an equity mindset, totally third party, and they rank all of these products Anything that was in the green or the close to yellow, we took a look at. Anything that was red, we pulled right out and didn't even bring it to the table for Peter to look at. But anything that came in here, there were 6 of them in terms of vendors and products. Had checked all the boxes in that regard. The question was, how closely did it check to our philosophy of ideation around? And it was pretty interesting, right? We ran through these 6 and I looked around, 4 times out of 6, when I look around about halfway through the presentation, the teacher's like, yeah, this didn't do this, this, and this, and this. We're done, we're good, thanks. So it made it pretty clear when we had that in our head ahead of time. Yes, we ran surveys and had them do check, but we already know we don't want this one. Stop saying that out loud. Just doing the data. Just fill out the form. And then we would look at it less and decide how we want to move forward. So we invited the vendors. That's here and so we reduced the eligible list to 2 particular vendors that we're still currently vetting. That happened probably about 3 months ago. We kept researching and taking a look. For the last month and even into this month, now I'd say all of February and I forget what month we're in. All of February and into the first part of March, we're piloting. We have resources from 2 particular products. One is called Reveal from McGraw-Hill. The other is Illustrative Mathematics, which is an open source resource, which a number of vendors carry, but the one that we're working with in particular is called Kendall Hunt. Because that Kendall Hunt is the main provider of that resource, online, free, open access to everyone. So those are the 2 main products we're looking at right now. We have them in selected classrooms. The teachers, before running these pilot sessions, ran through 2 separate training sessions with vendors, with the trainers from these vendors to bring them up to speed. So we had a good sense as to what they were looking to do in terms of these pilots. I've been in the classrooms, take a look. I was in 2 today, and it's really interesting to see the perspectives. It's interesting to see how the kids that, I've had this method focus for a while, how they responded to the new curriculum. It's been refreshing, a lot of work. So that's what we're in the middle of right now. This pilot training and site visits. Next Tuesday, we're headed up to Pottsgrove. We're gonna take around 7 or 8 teachers to Pottsgrove. I got the name right. I had 2-3 days to get it right before the big show here. And we're gonna spend all day with them, looking at a 1st grade, 3rd grade, 5th grade. Time after each of these observations, we're gonna sit with the teachers. The goal is to try to find out what the good, bad, and the ugly are, and reduce the ugly, and try to work on the bad, and be as proactive as we can. And there's no better way to learn that stuff than to hear from another teacher that went through it. That's for the Reveal program. I've got a phone call on Friday to speak with a representative from Garnet Valley High School, the curriculum there who's running a K-8, and we're gonna do a similar thing, take a trip to Garnet Valley to illustrate it. Same kind of questions. What are you seeing that's working well? What are you seeing that isn't? We have a widespread, I'm sure every district feels this, but a real business week. We've got a lot of needs we have to meet. So it's gonna be really deliberate effort on our part to address all of that. So that's where we are here. Decision, communication, training, that's ahead of us, March, April, May. The idea here is, my hope with, after all this piloting and visiting other schools, sometime late March, we can say, all right, this is the one we feel pretty good about. Let's move forward with that. Part of the involvement will be community sessions at each of the schools, elementary schools and the middle school. I'm gonna show up. I'm working with the principals now to try to find a date in April, May-ish, April, where these products can be out for the public. We're gonna do some math together for reaches to come on in. It's not bad. You'll love it. Spend it in the evening and the day. So they can get used to the materials as well. In May, I asked Dr. Connolly if I could get some time. I think we got the second half of the time to kind of roll out and again, do math together with the program that we end up taking a look at in anticipation of hopefully approval of the new program in the May board meeting. That's kind of the looking ahead plan for this, for these resources. Yeah, I think we got everything on there. But that's kind of the role the math vertical team has had. And I said, one of the rewarding benefits for me was like, okay, we'll do this till March, we'll get the training in, and then next year I can move on. And it was science vertical team. They're not letting go of this, which is great. Which is great. They're like, we got to keep doing this. I was like, okay, I'll put it in the budget. So it's been really rewarding, I think, to have these conversations as a K-12 team, which is really difficult when they're all on different schedules and in 5 different places and 2 different towns to get everybody together. So it's been really rewarding part of my years. So thank you. Questions?
Yes.
Cool.
Okay, let me check, see, my thing is Billy, Bennett, Ms. Whitson, do you have some questions?
I do. I'm interested in knowing how the vertical team lines up with special needs students. Because some of the processing that they have to go through could be even challenging for someone who has communication and language deficits. So how will you modify this program to meet the special need children, especially in the math domain?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to your question I'd like to answer. One specific to the math vertical team and how we designed to build it, that we made certain that we had representation of student services on the team. These are busy folks, they're in every building, so it was, and they're anxious to get a program that supports their students that they work with regularly and have had frustrations in the past, so they're vested in that regard, so they're involved. The special ed supervisors are very involved as well. One of them is going with us next week. We go to Pottsgrove to look and hear and talk and we'll try to find a particular time. What kind of modifications did you need? But both of the programs are specifically designed for providing opportunities for just exactly what you said, all the modifications that all students can access this. Math and focus has served us very well through the years, but I think one of the areas which it lacks is the ability to really provide differentiation options. We've had to come up with that on our own over time. There's a book that says reteach, there's a book that says enrichment. That's the differentiation. Give those two worksheets out, you're tapped out. Both of these programs, to answer your question, have deliberate designs in place to say, here's a check about halfway. When a student does this, you pull here. If a student does that, you pull here. One of the two programs ties directly to NWA map data, so that we're leveraging that data that we currently have. It can give a prescriptive response to what the students show deficiencies in, and then we can zone in right on that. A separate resource altogether than regular instruction, but it's an intervention resource that the teacher could use and see. Which right now, the teachers are making up completely on their own. And then again, the last 10 years, we've got a system. One of my beloved teachers that I worked with in second grade said, what are you gonna do with this? And it was literally, you see the old vanilla folders, right? That's like this wide, and it's filled with all these materials she's collated through the years. I was like, don't get rid of it. But I also hope you never have to make that again, right? But don't get rid of it, because that addressed exactly what you talked about before. Now, that was through a blood, sweat, and tears of 10 years. Our hope is that these resources will give us that. There will be a gap, however. And I started telling this to the teachers as well, that we're gonna have to plug, we're still gonna have to work. But with us going into the process, trying to address exactly what you said, our hope is that was a really long answer, but it's a big focus for us.
Yes, that's suitable. You said there's one particular program that has that additional resource. So how are the team members vesting these programs before they present? Because you're only going to be presenting one and not two, where we can have some feedback on the program.
Sure. So one of the things that was where those initial slides were. What do we hold really? This kind of broken out. Hold on, see how fast I can go back. Yeah, Paul, you move me back. There we go. We created a form of feedback loop, kind of almost a rubric. Give me a moment to find it. I can only do it in one direction. And boom, on this distillation idea, philosophy, needs, and wants, that when people were reviewing these or piloting them or trying them, they would give feedback to all these bullet points for the math vertical team. And that's the data we collected to try to address before any vendors came in what we really wanted and needed. It would be wonderful if every program aligned to NWEA. It just doesn't. One happens to do that. This is what I mean by every program is going to have a gap and a hole, and we would have to plug it. If we go with the other one, the illustrative mathematics, that doesn't have the correlation, that one's even legwork we would have to do. There's going to be some legwork. So that I think the direct answer to your question is the forms and the rubric that we've come up with here, based on this philosophy, non-negotiable wants and needs, or what kind of helps us narrow this down.
Okay. So you're gonna present the program that you want us to vote on as approving
In May,
in May.
correct. There are opportunities if you'd like, and I'm gonna take both of these resources to the teachers that aren't on the math vertical team, just so they have a chance to take a look at it as well. And they've actually looked at both of them already when we started this process, but now that we're down to two, I think they realize now it's real. Well, this is it, for them to take a look at that. And if, you know, the board wanna take a look at something in anticipation of the final decision, I'd be happy to do that too, set something like that. We've got, again, May is that final thing until February. If you'd be interested to see, take a look at both programs.
Yeah,
If that's what you're getting at, I think it is. Yeah, like, hey, you wanna have an appointment with me where we talk about math and the math curriculum? That'd be great. Bring the water, cause we're gonna be there a while. That'd be great.
I think it would be beneficial for me
Sure.
deciding on a vote.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Know that I think the math critical team has intention of presenting one that they ultimately would prefer, which is the goal of this whole process, so that, we've done a lot of research and feedback to get that, but I'm happy to show you too where we are now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a similar question about special ed representation on the team, and you covered that, so thank you. And also, you make me excited about math, you're saying a lot.
Oh, good. You're here.
I'm saying a lot, but my question was answered, so.
Yeah.
Ms. Williams?
I just have a comment. I think it speaks really highly of the teachers that they're so excited to be involved in your process. I think that that's really encouraging, and I think that we're moving in the right direction, and I'm excited, so
Yeah.
about math.
That's great. Man, thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo that. If you can get me excited about what's happening with math, that's an accomplishment. I just want to thank you for putting this together because it saves, you know, this is, on our YouTube channel for posterity.
Yes.
We're constantly talking to our neighbors and people, you know, all these great things that are happening in our school district. And then I can now refer them. I did it with, Dr. Mosakowski's presentation with, on the reading curriculum, as well. I'm doing that a lot too. Now I say, go to this meeting, watch what Mr. Benzie had to say, and now you have something really clear and exciting, you know, so I think. It reminds me of some of the things, you're talking about going to visit other schools. I get this feeling that schools are gonna now wanna come visit us soon, and that excites me as well.
Yeah.
Because I like to, you know, show off our students.
Yeah, as do I.
Yeah.
I mean, both of these products, are really fresh, really minted, really new, so, when we talked to these vendors, we'd really like to get you involved for exactly what you said. Yeah, that's great, that's good service to I get it.
Right, and, so I thank you also for putting our goals and our, you know, what our goals are, what are, you know, before we make a decision that we actually map out.
Sure.
You know, and I think that is a different way of doing things, and that, you know, getting that strategic plan out, and then, you know, relating it to our strategic plan. And, you know, that is, I could see several ways that this is related. It's professional development. You know, we are actually, you know, moving forward with that. It is, making sure we're aligned, and that we're aligned both horizontally and vertically, which is tremendous. And that, you know, that this is professional development too. I mean, this is all good in the right thing. And I'm just gonna ask that in future presentations too, can we like align it to the strategic plan? Can we add where we are? Because I think it's very helpful. It is for me that we are constantly addressing the strategic plan.
Mm.
And that is, and that we are moving forward in that direction. So I think if, you know, I can see that alignment, I think that's very helpful, that's keeps us in the direction that we want to be moving. So
Yeah,
thank you.
that's good feedback.
Just so you know, Monday. Saying to add the pathways to,
Yes,
to the presentation and how it aligns with,
Yeah, so just so you know, Monday night at the board meeting, the focus topic is strategic plan. So we're gonna give you kind of an update of where things are, but certainly you'll be able to see. And I thank the team for giving us all those items that we have been addressing in strategic plan. So that will be.
Great. I think it's,
so will that be part of your
I
presentation?
will be presenting, Dr. Morse, I'll be presenting, I think it's supposed to be, but I defer to my boss if he wants to say anything during that. But yeah, we're gonna have, after the high school presents, then certainly it'll be, I'll turn to talk about strategic plans. We're excited.
Well, Ms. Bukowski, I think that's good feedback for us, for me in particular, in this slide. Maybe before we can certainly add that. I mean, it's 2.2, it's student agency, it's students at the center of learning, like, that's all this resonates.
Right.
And that's the real purpose for this change. I mean, I think for years and years, the teacher was at the center of learning, driving and driving and driving, and now we're trying to flip the model a bit. Sometimes a curricular resource can help us with.
yeah, thank you.
If I could just add, what about equity of access? I mean, to me, it aligns with that as well. You know, we
Sure.
talk a lot about, making our curriculum accessible to a greater number of students, so. Yeah, I agree. Lots of points.
Definitely.
Thank you. Ms. Martin?
I want to echo, what Ms. Williams said, that to know that 38 teachers, 40 teachers are taking the time out to participate, and that's a lot of teachers that are coming in for this, and so that's fantastic to, that they joined, that you brought them into it. I really appreciate that. I want to acknowledge too, a story, this happened tonight at the dinner table. I have, a student, who did not believe that they were a mathematician. And unfortunately inherited mom's genes of being terrified every time something math was put in front of them, and psyched themselves out of being able to do a good job before we even started. And came home today and said, I'm actually pretty good at math. I think I can do this. And it's because of our teachers. It started with probably that same second grade teacher who time with her and help build that confidence, and her current teacher who has done an absolutely extraordinary job in turning her from someone who was really struggling to somebody who just told me that to me. So that means a ton to me. Okay. I'm emotional. I was around when we switched to math and focus, which was sort of terrifying and still is as a parent. So, I don't get it, but whatever. So can I assume that as we were to switch curriculum again, we would help bring families along with that, with some learning to help them absorb and understand how we're teaching differently?
Sure. And I think some of that are the community meetings we have set up for April, May, but I think once we get, our teachers on board and things going in the fall, I see a series of those to happen in math nights and tied in. I mean, have stations just like we did back with math and focus. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
we'll have a math fair.
Sure. There's math nights that go on and all
You
this.
can say light refreshment.
All right.
Because that gets people in.
I like it. I think we get a lot of people that are just saying math night, but we'll add that, like freshmen and go for more. That's good. I guess bad. Fabulous.
Ms. Holbrook, do you have any?
I just have a slight question back to that philosophy, non-negotiables one. Can you explain, I know that it's assumed that we all know this, but for anybody who might be watching it later or whatever, low floor, high ceiling.
Sure. I would say, well, I'll use an example that we looked at in the past, and then we can talk about it more generally. I don't remember in Ed Affairs, we had that border problem up on the front several years ago, where we asked, how many tiles are there? How many shapes are there? So that's something that, or even today, I'll take an example, because I can look around the room, people are like, what are you talking about? And things change. Today I was in a third grade class running one of these reveal lessons, and it was on perimeter. But the design of the lesson was such that they were just, what are you noticing? What are you wondering? And counting. And then all of a sudden, students were getting the answers, and the teacher facilitated this conversation. Tell me how you got your answer. Tell me how you got your answer. So one particular student said, well, I just counted around. Great, that's access. That's a low floor. Everyone can come on in the room at this point and be in the room and that kid got the right answer. They all got 26, they all raised their hand and got 26. Then another student said, well, I noticed that the left side and the right side were the same, but it's a rectangle. Right, so I just counted this once, and I doubled the answer, and I counted this once, and I doubled the answer. And then one student said, well, if it's a rectangle, this and this is the same. So I went from here to here and counted that as one and doubled it. Now we have another possibility. So each of those students came up with one particular strategy. They're uniquely different. But say, for example, I stretched that out a little longer before we shared, and I went to some of my students and I said, great, you got one. I want you to come up with two. Great, you got one, two. I want you to come up with three. Next thing I know, I'm pushing other students as high as I can go. And when everyone shares all this, we're all in this room with a really high ceiling and we're all of a sudden looking at the ceiling. We're all able to access the room. We walk down on the low floor and now together we push the ceiling way up. And I guarantee you the next time all of those students walk into the room, different kids will be pushing up the ceiling because they'll have access to all those different strategies. So that's a concrete math example of how that will manifest itself, but in short, it's the idea of access for everyone and a high opportunity for enrichment and challenge.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna pass it now to my colleague, Dr. Brad, to discuss little PLCs.
So, thank you, Mr. Benzing. I'm going to share some information about professional learning communities, which, in light of some of the feedback from the committee, it's directly connected to aspects of our strategic plan. And you'll see a slide a little bit later in the presentation that ties it directly to Pathway 2.3, and credit where credit is due. That particular slide was embedded based on feedback from my colleague, Mr. Benzing, that we were talking about, like, what are the ways that this could be like tighter or sharper for an outside audience, and just like to.
I forgot that. I didn't do that for my presentation. That's great. That's brilliant. That's such a Benzing thing right there.
That's good teaching.
That is such a Benzing thing to do. Well, I'm glad you did that.
So, credit, like I said, credit where credit is due, we're carry the positive and go teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work. And so as we begin this discussion, one of the things that I wanted to share with you is this is the definition, the premise of professional learning communities, that all of the work is moving forward based upon. And there are certain words that I've highlighted. And once again, I'm going to draw a connection back to Mr. Benzing's work and presentation, because so much of the work in a really high functioning professional learning community is about process and stance, and knowledge is constructed, not acquired. That collaboratively people come together to make understandings. They collaboratively wrestle through problems of practice rather than the answer being directed to someone, rather than someone saying, do this one thing and it works for all students, for all learners. And so echoes of that idea of professional learning community as a collaborative space where educators can come together. It echoes not only across things like the vertical team, and Mr. Benedict had pointed out, like, oh, there are tentacles, like there are vestiges of something that looks like a true PLC, because you have members of the K-12 math department coming together, wrestling through a genuine problem of practice with students at the center. And that process is really important. And when we think about how to invite people to think about a process differently, it's one of those things that you do have to live. Like it's something that you can't just give to someone. How many times as a parent or a guardian or a caregiver have we wanted to say to someone, oh my gosh, just think about it this way. And until we carve a path for someone to come to that kind of understanding, it can seem a little daunting. The idea of collective cycles of inquiry. So us asking meaningful questions together and collaboratively, and then us doing something with it. So a PLC that gets together and admires a problem is not a PLC. A PLC that looks at data absent a solution-seeking mindset or an understanding mindset. So now that I have this information, what does that mean for my practice? What does that mean for my students? And this idea of a high-functioning PLC is also committed to results. Like once you know this, once you know better, you commit yourself to do better. And how does that impact kids? And so I know I spent a lot of time on this one slide, but as a North Star, as a guiding force for what we'll do in this work, this is something that we'll come back to over and over throughout the process, because it is easy for PLCs to become a thing rather than a process. It is easy for PLCs to become places where you have one person who says, oh my gosh, it's just easier if I do it. I'll just make the test and you guys give feedback. Oh my gosh, I'm really awesome at data analysis. I'll analyze the data and then we can all talk about action steps. And so there are places where some of those moves to efficiency might be beneficial in the moment, but then we pay a heavier price for them on the back end. So in light of that vision, I also want to explicitly say what PLCs are not. So a professional learning community in this vision that we are articulating, it's not a prepackaged program. It's not something that you buy. It is a framework that we learn together and through. It is not a meeting. It is not a time in the schedule, but embedded time to meet is critical. Like the meeting itself or the protocol or the paperwork that you fill out is not as important as the questions and the process that you are engaged in. It's not a data template. It's not a do these 3 pieces of data and you get this result, or fill in data in this way, or share data that feeds an administrative purpose, or that even feeds a parent purpose, or that feeds a student conference purpose. It is data that is designed to be actionable. So we think about data as being informative. It's not a rote protocol. So in the first stages of growing into a PLC together, because it really is a process of growing and wrestling through it together. In those first stages, there are some protocols that help to give us guardrails and constraints and help us stay focused on kids being at the center. And so some of those protocols, it will sound really silly to say in a space that we're talking about being really generative, what does it mean that we want to make sure we are always asking why questions rather than what questions? Like that sounds so silly. And sometimes adults get a little like, oh, like I don't feel right if I say to Dr. Conley, like, oh, Dr. Conley, remember in this part, we're just talking about the why questions, not the what questions. But it helps us kind of center the work. So it's not a rote protocol, but there are robust protocols that have processes behind them that after you use them for a little while, you personalize them to your space. It's not something that's imposed on teachers when it's done well. It's something that we build together. It's something that educators collaboratively create and participate in. So I think not only knowing what it is, but also knowing what it's not is really important in the framing. And for all of this kind of high talk, I do just, once again, want to give credit where credit is due. The idea of a professional learning community, this is not a new idea. This is not something that is brand new to our world. If we go all the way back to people like Demings, and if you recognize any of these different people, some of them are from business, some of them are from sociology, some of them are from education, some of them are that this idea of working collaboratively helps us work better when we are organized in collaborative, cooperative ways. And I love that quote from Demings when he talks about like, when a good person is in a bad system, the system always wins. And so, like, what does it mean when we have somebody working really, really hard and there are places in the system where that could be a better support for someone? And to interrupt that, he had put in place this idea of collaborative teams and quality circles that says some of the best feedback comes from the people who are right around you every day. Just like in the math vertical team idea. So just like in the early literacy work that Dr. Mozakowski does, like the best of us brings out the best from us. And so thinking about all of this background information is leading us to a work by a man named Rick DeFore, so who wrote a book called Professional Learning Communities at Work. And his work is informed by all of those citations that you see above us. And what's also really amazing is that Richard DeFore, walked the walk. That he was a longtime principal at Adelaide Stevenson High School, which is in the suburbs of Chicago. Stevenson High School is a very high achieving suburban high school that had a long history of serving students well. And that faculty was committed to the idea of, we know we're doing really good things. Are there things we could be doing better? And of all places, does that sound familiar to anyone? And so grounding this work in the ideas that he had brought forward as a principal, that he was a principal, and then he became a central office administrator in that particular district. And under this vision, this very high achieving high school was able to do what some people thought was almost impossible. It won multiple blue ribbons. Like, to be a blue ribbon awarded school, it is based on your standardized test scores. That it is I don't remember which percentage, it's either the top 5 or the top percent of scorers on standardized tests according to national norms. It is very, very difficult to be awarded that. And at the same time, provide access to everyone. In this high school, every student takes the ACT, for example, and the average score there is 27, with every student in the district taking the ACT. And it is a comprehensive public suburban high school. And so part of what Rick DeFore was, since he had passed away, but what he had always credited the success of that school was in this particular model of professional communities. That's wonderful that that is background and information about the past, but like, the past isn't here anymore. Like, we're not in 1998 anymore. So what does current research say about PLCs? How has this idea grown and evolved over time? And so I have 6 or 7 citations here from pieces of more contemporary research. And so I've highlighted the pieces in blue that I think are particularly apt to our work right now. That PLCs, again, are about shared knowledge. DeFore used the idea of collaborative pragmatism, and everything is focused around student outcomes, what students get out of it. The idea of professional learning communities and being a professional support for each other during the days of COVID. Schools that had high functioning PLCs going into COVID, research suggested that highly flexible, adaptive learning spaces helped both students and helped educators thrive and be successful. So when we do this right, we elevate students. We also elevate teachers and we honor their expertise in really incredible ways. Hancock talks about the focus on student learning goals, that when you have a PLC and that PLC puts students at the center, the focus on student goals and student achieving goals is more clear and more pronounced. We also have research that talks about the benefit to teachers. All 3 of these research studies at the top there, the Darling-Hammond, the Fisher, and the Hancock, talk about the reduction of teacher stress, the increase in teachers' sense of belonging, and the existence of a work environment that is increasingly desirous to be a part of. We also have that inquiry piece around pedagogical self-efficiency and the idea of becoming increasingly innovative. That when you are surrounded by really smart people and you have a single goal around helping students do better, that sense of focus and purpose allows you to be innovative in ways that can be really fulfilling. Oh, interested? Yeah. So these are some of the components of a PLC. And so we think about student learning and their experiences as the first components, that it is collaborative and team-based, that not only are people together in a team, and part of learning about PLCs is there's a lot of energy invested in the distinction between an individual and the ways you move forward and be successful as an individual versus being a part of a group versus being part of a team. And so once again, things that seem like minor distinctions, but in practice, teams move the work forward in ways that groups are less successful and work harder to do. There's an action orientation. Again, it's never about admiring the problem, it's never just about meeting. And then the commitment to continuous improvement, even when we do it really well, the question we always want to ask is, well, what else can we do? Or what can we do better? And then being results oriented. And that was one of the things that Rick DeFora talked about, the PLCs that he called PLCs light. That's the area that they sometimes lost focus on, that they focused on the adults and what the adults were doing and not the impact of the adult action on kids. And so I thought that was a really interesting piece of his own research and work. You'll also be hearing about these 4 questions that guide a PLC. And the premise behind these is, once again, it's a guidepost. It is a way to keep our work focused. And if we enter lesson planning, if we enter data discussions, if we enter data analysis, if we enter instructional support team, if we enter all of our conversations in a school with these 4 questions at the center, we may get more focused answers and different answers than if we didn't have this as a focus. And so, like, what do we expect students to learn and be able to do? And what does it mean when you bring teachers together and they may be teaching the same unit, but in the beginning, sometimes people have different answers to that question. That becomes a really rich spot for students, to engage, for students to work to understand. Once we're clear on what we expect students to learn, how will we know if they learned it? Like, what is our gauge? What is our measure of success? Is it a test? Is it a demonstration of knowledge? Is it a project? Do you demonstrate success over time? What if you're not successful the first 3 times you do it, but you get it really solidly on the first? So questions like this open up all of those other sub-questions. How will we respond when students don't learn in that moment? This is the goal. This is how we're going to gauge if students are able to demonstrate an understanding. And then here's how we respond if they're not learning in that moment. And then here's when we respond when they do. Because at any moment, there are always places where we can do. I also just wanted to highlight the synergy in what Wallingford-Swarthmore is already doing. That this is a space that's right for the PLC conversation right now, because not only is it connected to strategic plan, it's also really tightly connected across almost every pathway and tentacle of our strategic plan. When we think about the work that's happening on engagement, where we're talking in the elementary schools, the middle schools, about lesson planning with purpose and what does student engagement mean? When we're talking about following up on the curriculum audit recommendations and academic steps. And so the work that we're doing with intentional unit upgrade and syllabi building, that's all work that becomes foundational to a PLC discussion. And it's also work that gets deepened when PLCs are firmly in place. So we're doing some foundational work right now that really makes the field right for continuing responding to some of the audit work. We also have the focus on student learning at its center. So everything from the first 4, which are the ways that we work to cultivate and build community during the first 4 days of class. And what does it mean to know who the kids are so that we help to engage with them more deeply, to the 2020 revisions to the Danielson framework, which is the teacher evaluation and feedback framework, which now focus more on student results than teacher actions, which is an interesting change from the 2013-2014 version. And then we think about everything that the curriculum team has done to frame learning experiences and expectations. You've heard Mr. Benzing talk about experience before formality. You've heard us talk about what does it mean to be practices centric instead of content centric? What does it mean when we think about the science of reading? What does it mean to think about assessment for learning instead of just assessment of learning? So that's all language that's already ripe in the district. And as we highlighted, thank you, Mr. Benson. So this is directly connected to pathway 2.3, which the long-term goal, the 5-year goal, the 10-year goal is that professional learning is an embedded and integral part of educator practice. And there is no finer way to learn than in collaborative, engaging discussions that push us to be better, that are driven by a question that helps us serve students better. And then just to re-emphasize some of the synergy, if we go back and we look at the pathway 2 statement of intent, again, thank you. If we go back, we can see those sections highlighted in blue are language where the definition of PLC overlaps with the teaching, learning, and innovation statement of intent. And our goal 2.3 of professional learning being an embedded and integral part of educator practice. This is one way of moving that forward. So then how do we actually do that? That sounds great, like that sounds wonderful. That seems like a big lift. How do we actually do that? We do it thoughtfully, responsibly, and with a long-term plan. And so on the next 4 slides, I'm going to share with you a long-term roadmap. That is just that, it is a loose roadmap. And so what that means is it gives us a very clear sense of direction for creating a culture of PLCs. What it also does is it gives us the flexibility to be responsive to how PLCs will grow up and take root in our particular space. And so in this first year, what we're working to do right now is we're working to formalize a relationship with a company called Solution Trade, which is a company that works to support emerging PLCs. It's actually an organization whose work is grounded in Richter's work. And so that's why this particular group. We are working to bring an experience where some ninth grade teachers will learn about PLCs in person. And we're thinking about site visits to see some model PLCs. So there are some PLCs that are drivable right from our school. And so what does it mean to go and visit PLCs? Ideally, some PLCs that have a tight core to some of these regional protocols so that we're not seeing a derivative of a derivative, at least in our kind of early stages. There is an opportunity to do a book study. So some teachers at the high school have requested copies of the book Learning by Doing. So we have about 10 copies of that book that are on order right now that are on their way to the high school for people who want to start reading with us. Let's read, let's explore, let's figure out what this could and should be. And then there's also a team at Strathaven High School that is working to draft a tentative schedule for what would this look like if we had a small number of ninth grade teachers who are able to participate in a PLC pilot, very small scale pilot. Are there ways that we can arrange their schedule so that they have some built-in collaborative time? So that they're not trying to sneak in these conversations about what do students know and are able to do? How do we know it? What will we do if they struggle to? And then what do we do when they demonstrate their learning? How can we knock down obstacles for people's conversations that I think teachers are really hungry to have? So there's some planning work right now to say, is it possible that we can not just talk about this, but let's have a small group of teachers try it with lots of support and lots of love, and let's try to see how we can do that in a way that best fits our district. And then there is an opportunity that we're working to build right now for teachers, administrators, and if people are interested in board members, like come with us. Come and like sit, next to us in the car as we're talking about what we hope to see and what we really see. Let's see what professional learning communities look like in action, because as Mr. Benson had also pointed out, there is no better persuader. There is no better way of learning than from another teacher. And there is possibly potential for everyone who is an administrator in this district to learn more about PLCs during summer retreats. We don't have that agenda worked out yet, but that's also kind of a learning opportunity. So this first year, tiny little toe dip in the water. Let's figure out what this might be. Let's figure out how we want it to be for us. And by the time we go into year 2, once again, we still see ourselves staying relatively small in our scope, but possibly giving some additional learning invitation, inviting more people who might be interested in participating in a book study, to continue to wrap any piloting teachers with embedded support. Like if you're going to try this, what do you need in order for your conversations to be most productive? Like, what do you need in terms of an obstacle that needs to be knocked down? What do you need in order for your conversations to be most helpful and most productive? And that's everything from resources to time to access to data sets to sample protocols for how to discuss things to kind of on-call time, like when you need something and you're trying this, like reach out, like let us work with you to build this kind of little sample. And then time for us to debrief and learn about it. And then by that second year, we may have teachers in other buildings who, upon hearing some of the work we're doing at the high school, are like, well, I want to be part of that small learning team in my own building. And so instead of taking an initiative and spreading information about it top down, the goal is to try to build information and build support for something like this ground up so that it really is ours. And you'll see that going through year 3. And the goal is a spidering effect. And so the degree of that spidering effect, we'll have to, by the time we get to year 3, we want to leave ourselves open enough to honor what's happening, but to still follow a roadmap that says, okay, by year 3, we're hoping that everybody in the district will have had access to a book study. We're hoping everybody in this district who says, well, wait, I want to learn more about PLCs have had an opportunity to talk to an administrator or participate in some kind of learning experience. What exactly will that look like? I think we need to listen to teachers' needs to figure out. And then by the time we get to step 4, notice that first bullet, we're still providing continued support to educators at Strathhaven High School. For this to work, for this to really get in the bones, we have to do something for 3 to 5 years. And then once it becomes a system, once it becomes something that is just a part of the culture, it is something that no one will ever want to give up or give away, at least in the experiences I've had related to PLCs. And so that is an insane degree of detail in terms of trying to think out to a 4-year plan. But the idea of thinking both small and large simultaneously, which is something that we wanted to share with the board. So thank you for allowing me to share all the details. And I'll take some questions if you have.
Ms. Whitsitt?
I just have a statement that I think that this is exciting and thrilling. And the work that you put in when you said, greatness comes from greatness or something like that. That you are an example of that, that your level of education and excitement and just your sense of what is needed in the district is evident in the work that you've done in the short time that you've been here, and we are blessed to have you as part of the district.
Right now, like, I told them that, like,
That's what we do.
Thank
maybe.
Yeah, it's so fair, this is what we're doing.
like, shut up until someone cries.
That's right. Good meeting, Mary Jo, well done.
Tagline. You can cry with us.
Yes, more to your policy, clearly.
Sorry about that. Dr. Messy is never gonna get promotion.
Oh, thanks. I am completely moved by that. Thank you. That was so kind and very generous, and so much of the energy and the desire for this work comes from just the awesomeness of the kids, the dedication of the teachers, and everybody on this table. Like Andy talks about math, but it's not without a lens towards what's valuable across the board. Like Ashwin talks about, Dr. Moskowski talks about elementary literacy. It's not without a knowledge of what's good across the board. And so you can't bring ideas like this forward unless it comes from a place of we, and that the board support and the board openness to ideas like this is just, it's inspiring, and it makes me and it makes all of us want to work harder. So thank you.
I agree. I'd read the full book if you told me to. You know, you just are so excited and enthusiastic about it, Christine.
Still taking-
That's technology.
I do have a couple of questions, just out of curiosity, why the high school? I'm just curious to know that.
Question. So one of the things that we will sometimes talk about is what are the spaces that are both ripe for conversation and also might benefit from additional structures and supports. And so there are some places in this district that are really, really ripe for the conversation, but they already have some structures and supports in place. And there are some places that have structures and supports in place that are amazing and awesome, might not be right for the conversation yet. The 9th grade team at Strathaven High School and the conversations around, like, what does it mean? I'll get very specific. What does it mean when the 9th grade English team has a conversation about how can we refresh our literature selection? It feels like kids aren't reading the way that they did 3 years ago and 10 years ago. Like, what does it mean when we have a large number of students who are taking an honors class and are coming in just a ball and a bundle of nerves and trying to, it feels like they're trying to guess at our expectations. And we think we're being really clear, but are learners feeling that? Like that kind of question, which comes from a deep space of inquiry, that comes from an action orientation, has all of those component parts. And so over the last year and a half of being in this district, I tried very hard to listen for a space that was right for those two elements right now. And there's also high school schedule and its blocks is easier to kind of parse out time. So some of it might be a little bit easier for us to try to get a pilot moving forward in ways that wouldn't upend a team structure that already exists in a middle school, or that wouldn't upend a team structure that already exists in elementary. So I think those are some of the component pieces.
Yeah, and then to piggyback off of that, I'm just curious to know how many teachers are interested in that April 8th and 9th? And are they sort of like cross-discipline, and how are they selected? And can you talk just a little bit more?
So right now, we have a tentative plan for the teachers we'd like to invite, because this will be during a school day, that we're working to bring in 2 full days of training. Until I have all the i's dotted and t's crossed, we didn't want teachers to have to plan for that. But our list right now is cross-disciplinary across the 9th grade. So teachers who will likely have a touch on 9th grade in some way. So there's 3 or 4 English teachers, 2 social studies teachers, 2 world language teachers, an art teacher, an FCS teacher, 2 health and PE teachers, 2 or 3 science teachers, 2 math teachers. Math teachers work kind of more across different courses. At least 1, if not 2, special education teachers. And so we are looking for teachers who will have a touch on 9th grade in some way. So we're thinking about the schedule and the logistics. At the same time, we are trying to be cognizant about who we're going to pull from their classes, but we're trying to be really thoughtful and have a team that can help us build, and that will also, to a degree, can challenge us. That there are some people who are like, oh my gosh, like I wanted to do this yesterday. And there are also some people we are very purposely putting on this team to push our thinking, because if we come into this room and fall into groupthink, then I don't think the work could move forward in any kind of larger structural way.
I think I have another couple, but I'm gonna let someone else. It does, thank you.
So I'm very familiar with PLCs, and I think that they're very valuable. I really appreciate the fact that you have been so intentional and thoughtful, even down to, my question was gonna be like how you selected the 9th grade teachers. So that makes me really happy to hear that you feel like they're right, with your words. So, I think that that's great. I will say from a personal perspective, a lot of things you said resonated with me. Like, it's weird at first. It pulls you out of your comfort zone a little bit. And now, several years into it, like you said, I'm kind of like, I don't know what I'd do if we didn't have that around. And like, we have different PLCs, like we have just our department, and then we have cross-curricular, and I'm assuming that's ultimately what the goal here is as well. And so like I had a PLC this morning, and I was with a math teacher and a foreign language teacher, and like it's really, I think, I doubt our teachers would react negatively to any of this, but it's a little daunting at first to like shake things up. But I do think, as you said, I like what you said at some point, like it's an investment and we have a long-term plan, and I know it's like something that's going to stick around. It's not like the newest idea and then it's tossed out the window in a couple of years. So I think they're really going to find it valuable, and I think you've done a great job of planning and being very intentional. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a couple quick questions. They're gonna be obvious, questions, but I thought it's good to have it out like verbally so people can see it later. The first one, I want to thank you for making it clear out this, PLC is part of and supports our strategic plan. You made it obvious. Thank you, Mr. Benson. I mean, I think it's just easier to put it right out there. This is why we're doing what we're doing. We were talking about, you were describing what a PLC was, and it reminded me of what Mr. Benny just talked about, the math vertical. And I'm gathering from your answers to Christina Michelle's questions here, but are PLCs always subject specific?
So wonderful question, and I am going to build off of what Ms. Williams had just brought to the conversation. No. And so a PLC can be interdisciplinary. So where we pull teachers from across disciplines. So it might initially look and feel a little bit like a middle school team. It can be a content-based organization. That's where you will have teachers come together and say, how do we build the best common assessment? How do we make decisions about what we value enough to put on an assessment? That idea of assessment as a statement of value. And there are places where you will have a PLC that could also echo around a particular problem of practice. And so if as a school, so the middle school this year was really committed to thinking about student engagement. Like, what does it mean to bring together a group of teachers who might not otherwise get together? Because remember, we want to combat an echo chamber. What does it mean to bring together different ways of thinking and different kinds of thinkers to kind of get to a problem, get to a resolution in an unexpected way? So the big thing that separates a PLC from a group is that alignment to purpose. Like, what is the question that drives this group? And how do we hold each other accountable to staying true to that focus or that question that is driving us?
Okay, Mr. Member, when I was a principal, I had a PLC with our brand new teachers. And that was an important goal for me. We talked about student engagement, we talked about student learning, we talked about lesson plan, right? So it was like, so what I try to do is each month we would meet, we would only meet once a month, but part of my walkthroughs, part of my observations with them, because I was their direct observer, we would connect to a different piece of Danielson's framework, because they're new teachers, right? And they hadn't had this experience, and it was so powerful. And what I tried to embed, it was different than when they were there for New Teacher Academy, for their induction program, because I wasn't really part of that, right? But I would try to work in mentor teachers that come in, and it was awesome. I mean, it was a great experience for me. It kept me, as Dr. Pratt said, on my toes, right? Because I was holding myself accountable when I do my observations with our new teachers. This is what I'm looking for, and I want to give you that instant feedback, and that was really important for me as well. So it was such a valuable part of my practice.
Yeah, that's a great example, it's different than the subject.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know the answer to this because I've had professional educators here and I see what you're talking about, but just what you're saying to me, if you could confirm that educators desire this collaboration and they want this, they find this motivating.
They
That's what I'm
will.
hearing.
They'll
All right.
want it after they.
All right, well, that's an excellent point. Right.
But they do.
All right, but that's an excellent point. I think that they will
They will appreciate.
want it, and they will find it motivating to find that that's the case. Yeah, okay. And which leads me into my last question. I wrote down a couple of comments you made, talking about teachers feeling valued, honor their experience, sense of belonging, conversations teachers want to have. I can't read my own handwriting. All of that, does all of that help with morale and retention? I mean, we all of us here in the United States are hearing about teachers being just fried and burned out. So does this type of thing help with retention and people's morale?
If I can jump in one second.
Please.
I will say, as for the morale, one of the things I really liked about it is I worked in a big building and I didn't see all the people in all the buildings. So when you're in a cross-curricular PLC, you actually start to like build some connections with people you normally don't see.
Yeah.
So I really like that about the PLCs. And one thing that you had mentioned to us as well is that to piggyback on you, the retention part, like it does help with teacher retention, you know, and the fact that like we invest so much money upfront in teachers and then they stay on because they feel valued and, you know, so but to you.
No.
I could not have answered that better myself.
All perspectives are welcome, for sure.
And so just that idea of reducing teacher stress, helping teachers feel a greater connection to their school. The idea that you have 3 different pretty high power research studies, totally divorced from each other, that are formally articulating that finding. And then as a teacher who has participated in a PLC and a teacher who has participated in a PLC, I do think your description of the initial wade into the water, like any change, feels like, oh my gosh, wait a second, why is my dear friend of 20 years saying I can't ask any what questions right now? And so, but as you engage in the work, you're like, oh my gosh, this is really helping me be more connected to my colleagues. It's helping me be more connected to my students. It is helping me regain a joy that I think COVID took away from some educators related to their practice, because it centers the teacher conversation. Like, it centers educator expertise in ways that get decentered when there is some like top-down answer. So,
I think from a board's point of view, that anything that we can do to get at retention of our amazingly important staff is good, and which also obviously makes us an attractive place to work, which we also want to be. So I will just say that publicly so that it's there. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I got.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and I want to reiterate the thank yous and the, because I think this is a very important work, I'd say especially for teacher retention, especially for morale in our buildings. After COVID, I do think there was a lot of pulling apart and people working in isolation for years and not, and that anything we can do to rebuild that is very positive. As we move ahead, so I have a couple questions. Into the future, will it be the expectation that all of our staff belong to PLCs?
So I think having that as an aim, as a North Star, is important. I also think we need to be flexible to the idea that it's going to look based on how the need evolves in this particular building.
Okay.
So I'll speak first person example. So when I was a teacher, we had a 9th grade PLC that was pure, that met as a content English team, content social studies team, content math team. Like, if you were a 9th grade teacher, you were all in, all 9th grade, all your discipline. And so there was a content-based team that met once every 4 days. And that time was sacred. You were never called to cover a class. You never assigned a duty. It was sacred, sacred, sacred time. Every 9th grade teacher was also part of a 9th grade team. Just like a middle school team, you shared all of the students. In 10th grade, we were committed to a content area team that met once every 8 days. And twice a month, you were able to meet with an interdisciplinary team. In 11th and 12th grade, because we made decisions to open up elective choices. So for example, in my previous district, we had worked really hard to let kids vote with their feet. And you didn't take English 11 or English 12. There was one of 9 courses that you took, and you had to take an English course once every year. It's really hard to try to align a PLC, a true PLC structure there, because you have so much flexibility and choice and voice with the students. So we would have an 11-12 ELA team, but then we would have to make trade-offs for where we were sharing. So we prioritized, like, we made very purposeful decisions about where we wanted pure content and interdisciplinary PLCs. And then we thought about what realistically does the structure support, because we could have had that if we would have hired 20 more teachers. But the structure doesn't support that. Like, there comes a place where the structure of the building doesn't hold that many people. So we were very honest in our hard conversations, and we had them together. Like, they weren't administrative conversations that happened closed door. Like, if we're going to serve kids, what is the best way for us to do it? And we figured that out together, which then created greater buy-in when we needed someone like, oh my gosh, could you be off team for one section in this 1 year because we have a bubble? And people are like, oh my gosh, that's no problem. it created a sense of we in a way that was really awesome.
That's great. Thank you. That sense of we is so critical. Thank you. And that's a wonderful approach. I really appreciate that. The other question is, how does it PLC dovetail with professional development?
So one of the things that we'll often talk about is professional learning and the opportunity for PLCs to be a space of embedded professional learning. And so to think about the way we learn best, whether we are 2 or 102, is we apply. There is something that is more hands-on. And so to think about what it means to have a trusted group of colleagues who are able to take a really hard discussion from a speaker around cultural proficiency and say, you know what, how does this connect to what we're trying to do in our class right now? It is taking an opportunity to do things like the cup stacking opportunity that was an exercise the math vertical team did as a group of 30 after school and say, hey, we're all teaching the same class. How do the success criteria look for us? So in one vein, it is the application of learning. In another vein, relates to that kind of problem of practice idea. It is this is what we are curious about. How do we learn more about it? And so when we think about like inquiry and action research. So for example, here at the middle school, there are 2 7th grade Spanish teachers. And they were wrestling with a real problem of practice where they noticed we were giving these quick little quizzes to see what students knew in terms of vocabulary, and they had a bimodal distribution in their score results. That was for you. That was for you. So in the bimodal distribution, you had half of the kids who were getting like 90s and 100s, and the other half of kids were getting 50s and 60s, and there was no middle. Like you just had high and low. And the teachers were like, we don't know what we are doing wrong. Like, we don't know like what we could do. And so I invited those teachers to come in, and as a problem of practice, they set up this incredible like book making vocabulary experience that helped. But it came from a real question they had from a real noticing that was spawned by a professional learning discussion because we're all reading proficiency-based world language instruction. So they could have just sat through the proficiency-based learning instruction workshop and said, check, check, done, done. But they had an idea that was inspired by something they heard. They thought about something that was actually happening in their classroom. They were brave enough to say to each other, we don't know how to solve it. They were brave enough to reach out to their administrators and say, can you help us knock down some obstacles? And then that's part of like our work to listen to what people need and knock down walls.
So if, just to the nitty gritty, if PLCs are meeting outside of the school day, after school, other things, and they're actually doing learning, can they get professional development hours credit for all of that?
So
in lieu of?
And so one of the things that I love the idea of how we reimagine time. And that's one of the big areas in our strategic plan. It's one of the big conversations around what does it mean to think about time in the most meaningful ways possible. And so I think the idea that that you're sharing with what does it mean to figure out what teachers need and then think about the best ways to use time. I think that's an ongoing kind of question we all have. And I think there are pieces of this PLC model that we need to let grow a little bit to figure out like what is the best need and what is the best way to meet that need. So I don't want to answer that question prematurely because I feel like there's more I need to learn. But I'm very open, and I think this whole team is really open to the idea of time and thinking about time differently.
Great. Good. Interested to hear. Okay. That's all I have, and thank you again. Yes. Ms. Walker.
I've learned so much just listening I had this idea of what PLCs were, but it wasn't formed at all, so this was incredibly helpful. It was very interesting to listen to it and to listen to you, all of you who are educators, as well, about what it looks like in practice in education. And when you put up the resources, I see Demi and I see Drucker and, oh, wait a second, I know what this is, kind of just applied in a different, model. And the team I work with right now in my office, I would say is the highest performing team I've ever worked with. And part of the team is a dedicated continuous improvement team. And they sort of just naturally come together. I want to figure out how we can apply some of this, but the best learning that we've ever had is coming from each other. It's not bringing in a consultant. It's not, I love consultants. There's a place for them, but learning from each other and creating this safe space where they can, I watched somebody the other day go, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Can you please explain that? It is amazing. And just the growing that they're doing. There's a lot of younger people, and then there's people like me that have been there forever. It's so energetic to come into that. So I'd love to see this develop in that way and myself be able to learn from it and take it back into my other world that I live in. So thank you very much for the time that you're putting into it. It sounds really exciting. Ms. Colbert?
So I'm also trying to parse this through and understand it a little bit better. It sounds like, on the one hand, I heard that sometimes PLCs are put together kind of like to ask a question or solve a problem, and sometimes they're ongoing, like, is that correct? And like, can they not spontaneously emerge, but can they just emerge and then, like, be done? Okay, I'm done for the year. And then sometimes they are just continuous, like, you're in ninth grade, you're gonna be on this team, or this PLC. And then my second question is, so hold that. My second question is, you said to a certain extent, the math vertical team had portions that were like a PLC. But then I also heard you say the word team, and I don't want to, they're not interchangeable, right? So there's some learning as to how to be on a PLC, how to be on a PLC. That's what this initial training would be. That's what Solutions Tree is for. It's not just like, okay, I'm gonna be on this team, we're gonna figure out these questions. There's something more to it than that. So I'll let go.
In some ways, you have, I think, answered your own question, but I'm going to kind of to share back what I was hearing in that. So PLCs are ongoing. They're not kind of like drop-ins, because that is the way that you build trust in the team, that you're literally building a community of learners. And if someone were there for 2 meetings and didn't come for 4, like, you don't want to create a space where you have either givers or takers, because that, if you don't come together.
I didn't really mean that. I more meant that that the PLC can evolve. And then once something is resolved, then it's, goes away or something like that. That's what I wasn't quite sure about.
Great question. And so because we are committed to every student being able to learn and be able to do more tomorrow than they did today, that need will never go away. So
But the questions may come.
The questions may change. And so, for example, I imagine the first year that a 9th grade PLC will be together, there might be some time thinking about the foundational curriculum work we're doing this year. And the question will likely be, how are we making this real? So here's the syllabus that we all said we were all hands in on. This is what we said was going to be our common assessment. What are the things we value? And we're privileging them or not privileging them in certain ways. If the team is making a decision to give a multiple choice test, they are making a decision to not have long answer questions. Like, you can only do so many things. Like, those are value discussions that a team will have. I don't imagine that will be the same discussion in the 3rd or 4th year of a high functioning PLC. And so I think the questions will grow and evolve. And if a PLC is able to maintain integrity as a group, that just continues to build trust. But you also don't want your PLC to calcify. Like you don't want the same voices to like never, so there really is this.
You have to be more dynamic.
Well,
Exactly.
and I think you gotta be really, I was a teacher that did PLCs, and I was a principal as well, with PLCs, and you have to be very deliberate that it's not just another department meeting. Right?
Yeah.
Where it's not just an opportunity, Leslie and I are co-teaching American Studies, it's not just another planning period, right? It has to be very, very deliberate. And I remember when I was a teacher, our department chair was in my PLC, and she was very clear that she's not in charge of the PLC, right? Even though she was our department chair, and I loved her dearly. But it was a very, very deliberate decision to be something different. And I think that always struck me as a young teacher, that this is what it is, and this is what it isn't. There was a time and place to have a department meeting and have a faculty meeting, but this PLC, which it could, this will be right, change every year, right? We can have a question and we have a group of teachers that are working together, and the next year it's a different group. But it was really dynamic for me as an educator, for sure, and what I got out of it in so many ways.
And I do just also want to honor the second part of your question. I think your description of this initial workshop is about like, what does it mean to learn to be part of a PLC? Like, what does it mean to think about our work, which for many teachers, we work so hard and we largely shoulder that work individually. And that burden is hard and heavy. And so some of the initial PLC work is, it benefits all of us when we share the load. And learning how to do that in ways that are really productive, that's how we'll shift culture and stance. So that's some of the original, like that's some of the initial training work.
I was just saying that for new teachers, I think PLCs are amazing because, you know, typically you get thrown into the deep end and like, here you go. You know, and a PLC really gives you a support network.
It's one of the things that I've observed, just the difference that I see in education, and maybe that's because we don't have PLCs, I don't know, but that shouldering that burden on yourself, I have never seen in the same way outside of education ever. It's weird to me, really weird to me, and it became really apparent during the pandemic because I watched folks working so hard, the individual teacher, people were working amazingly hard, and I couldn't figure out like, well, why doesn't Kevin do Monday's lesson and we all do it? And Michelle does Tuesdays, like, we would immediately divide that up and share it, and we just didn't have the structures, we didn't have the support systems, we didn't have the technology to be able to do it, and I just thought, oh my gosh, what a huge burden on an individual person. So I'm hopeful this really does actually make a big difference on that by sharing that load.
And that idea of building the culture to share the load, like so much of the initial part of this work is, it's culture building.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, I think another reason that that's hard is because, you know, the old days, everybody did their own thing in their own room and there wasn't kind of a uniformity of curriculum. And I think that this having, I know, not a department meeting, but you know, the PLC, why are you laughing?
We're like, yep. Those are the good old days, right?
Yeah, we'll get our phones and phone books.
I had projector and my document camera.
Right. But I think it also brings a little bit more like uniformity and collaboration, and we're just, you have to have that today,
Otherwise you are on.
you're on your own island.
Yeah.
Well, and the first year teachers, one of the things, all the research talks about, you know, brand new teacher, right? They're pushing their cart down the hall, they don't have space. And that happened to probably all of us, right? And, you know, having a space where you do have a network of people that are colleagues, and not just colleagues that are, hey, Leslie and I are new teachers together, but the veteran colleague who teaches science, right? I was an English teacher, but getting to know other colleagues who were veterans, and I could pick their brain, and maybe it wasn't about, you know, about Hawthorne, but maybe it was about just what do we do here on this day?
Right.
Where do I stand? That's why it's like, I didn't want to ask my colleague, but it was the way to have another friendly face that you can connect with, so.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's really powerful, so.
I just wanted to, put one other thing out there. I heard you say a few things that spoke to fiscal responsibility, which as a board member, I really appreciated hearing. I mean, I know we as a board know that this year has been budgeted for already. But a few things you said, I felt spoke to that piece of it as well, which is important. Including the long range planning, just kind of knowing what's ahead and what that might look like. Thank you for that too.
You are most certainly welcome. The idea of being all of education, we have a fiduciary responsibility, and it is a gift of trust. And that's not something that any of us take lightly. And I know I try to be very, very thoughtful in terms of this investment will pay us dividends. And I'm thinking about the dividends 5 years from now. And that's why I'm trying to be very clear and transparent in, like, this is a 3 and 4 year process, but the dividends we're going to see in year 4 and 5 are going to be so much that I truly believe it is worth the investment of the issue. All right,
So when are we, is this a vote that's gonna come before the board?
So at one point in time, when we clear solicitor review, there will be a contract that will be coming before the board for this kind of first round of training. And then there will be a plan next year that I'd like to present before the board very early in the year in September or October, likely with a not to exceed amount that says, like, these are the things we're hoping to do, but also asking for the board's, I'm a talker and an oversharer. I'll definitely keep you all up to date. But kind of asking for, this is the roadmap. When we need these pieces, does the board grant their support for us to move forward kind of as those different levers need to be pulled? So yes, there will be an action that requires a vote. I don't know if the contract is completely ready for Monday's board meeting. But if not, you'll see it on the March meeting, and then next year in September or October. Great, so in terms of our next educational affairs meeting, the next educational affairs meeting is on March 20th. There are 3 topics. We will get an engineering essentials update. We will have, and that's from Mr. Bensing, and we will have 2 updates from Dr. Musikowski, who will update it on Read Across America, as well as elementary social studies. If you are watching at home, please come and join us in person. Everyone is welcome. The meeting will be held in person on March 20th at 7 p.m. here in the middle school in B226. So there are no further questions. Good. I think we are ready to adjourn. Thank you, everyone.